everybody, and welcome to this edition of Nonprofit Spotlight. I'm Steve Plach, and I'll be your host. As you know, Nonprofit Spotlight is a production of the Volunteer Advisory Committee here at Community Television. And every show, we highlight nonprofit in Santa Cruz County doing wonderful, wonderful work. And this edition, we're really happy to spotlight the Association of Faith Communities Faith Community Shelter Program. And we're really lucky to have with us Sam Altis, who is their program manager. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Yeah, wonderful to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. And, I know from doing my little research that you're a pastor, a manager of nonprofits in the past. I did not know that you were a podcaster. So that's the one piece of information I didn't have. So for our audience, just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you came to the AFC and the Faith Community Shelter.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, my background is in the faith world. So I went to seminary, which is just graduate school for people who want to work in a faith community. But I studied at seminary both faith-related matters, but the intersection of those things with issues of poverty and justice to try to work alongside faith communities to help them make the world a little more just, a little more whole. So I have had the pleasure of wandering around the country doing that. I spent time in Indianapolis doing that, working for a church. I've done it in Napa, California, working for a church. I have worked in refugee resettlement up in the Puget Sound area. So kind of bounced all over the place and followed my spouse here to Santa Cruz in the past year. And when I found out about the work of the AFC, I was really excited. Really natural fit, really similar to the type of work that I've done before. So was thrilled to jump in to a really long legacy of excellent work around shelter and a lot of other things in Santa Cruz. And so that's kind of how I landed here. I used to have a podcast on the side. If anyone looks it up, you'll see it's not updated in about 2 years. So not the most timely sort of thing, but people are welcome to check it out.
And
it's about progressive.
Better World, is that what it was?
A Better Story. So it's about
story. Okay.
Yeah,
great.
about progressive spirituality. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's wonderful. And of course, I think that you really landed in a great place. The Association of Faith Communities, of course, part of their mission is to help people in poverty and work for social justice, as well as their charitable and faith-based activities. Tell us a little bit about the Faith Community Shelter, the people you've got there. We were fortunate enough to have, I'll say, with us your predecessor, Debbie Bates, who was a longtime manager of the Faith Community Shelter. And so we're delighted to have you to kind of give us an update and tell us about the present and the future of the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Debbie Bates managed the program for years and did an absolutely spectacular job. Really, really fantastic. So I'm walking into a top-notch program. We historically have been an interfaith shelter that rotates every night to a different faith community. So a faith community will offer to host, and oftentimes that same faith community will bring in dinner and serve that dinner to our shelter members, and not just serve it, but also sit down with them, share a meal, share a conversation, really building community. As with everything in life, COVID changed that. It made that high interaction not safe and not possible. So really, for most of the time during the pandemic, we have been somewhat sheltering in place. We've moved from being a nightly shelter to open 24/7, which has been really beneficial to our participants. We've seen the amount of folks who move into permanent housing almost double. We went from about 20% to close to 40% of our folks moving into permanent housing once we moved to a 24/7 model. So that was really exciting. Yeah, we were really encouraged to see that. The downside of that is there's been less social interaction. We haven't got to bridge those social divides that often exist, not just in Santa Cruz, but all over the country. And so we're actually transitioning back to the nightly model as the pandemic hopefully winds down, big question mark there. But we have basically, because of timeliness, because of funding, a lot of other things, we're moving back to becoming a nightly shelter that is hosted in faith communities, where those faith communities provide meals. We're going to adjust that a little bit to make sure it's safe. So we're going to limit the ability of those volunteers to actually eat with our folks. They can sit down and have a conversation masked if they want to, but we want to limit the exposure for a vulnerable group. And yeah, the program is really about building community. The folks who are a part of it have a responsibility in the shelter. They have ownership, we hope, over it. So they do chores. They attend a weekly meeting. There's issues can be raised and discussed, and we really encourage them to try to work it out among themselves and to own that community as much as possible, all while moving into a more stable place and hopefully moving towards housing along the way.
And I'll hasten to add that, of course, as you know, one of the hats I wear is as a coordinator for the Shelter Project. And being a volunteer during the times when we did rotate, that's one of the wonderful features of the program, is to have the volunteers come in and interact with the houseless folks themselves and share stories and share experiences. I think it's really beneficial and experiential for everybody to be able to do that. And this show, of course, is evergreen, and it'll play several times during the year. But just to know that next month you'll be hosted by St. John's, and ultimately you'll be going back, as I understand it, back into rotation.
Yep. So in October, we'll be at St. John's Episcopal Church in Aptos. They have very generously offered to host us for an entire month. And then beyond that, we will go back to a nightly rotation. So we currently have, I believe, 9 or 10 different faith communities that have offered up their space and are going to host us. And it really is about that interaction. I'll say, just from a personal note, getting to interact and get to know the shelter members has been one of the most rewarding parts of this job. I think that in a place like Santa Cruz, or really anywhere in California, we tend to make big generalizations about people who are experiencing homelessness. And the closer we get to folks like our folks in the shelter, we realize there's context, there's story, there's humanity there. And it becomes less of an abstract issue that we read about or post about, and it becomes something that actually has some humanity to it, and it becomes much more real.
So now, what kind of outreach are you, and of course, Mary Ann will mention, as your assistant program manager, who does wonderful, wonderful work. What kind of outreach are the both of you doing, and how can unhoused people, what can they expect in terms of a review process to get into a placement for this program itself?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Mary Ann. Mary Ann is a vital piece, as all of our coordinators as well are. We have a really excellent staff that connects folks to housing resources and just shows a lot of love to our folks. But if folks are interested in getting into the shelter, there's a couple different steps to the process. The first step is to actually reach out to me, and I believe my information will be available. You can call me, you can email me, and we will just have a brief phone conversation, talk about what's expected at the shelter, things like I mentioned previously, doing chores, basic accountability to folks. If it all looks good from there, then we'll sit down, most likely with Mary Ann. They would sit down with Mary Ann for about a 30 to 60-minute interview and a conversation to walk through, hear a little bit more about their story, make sure they're a good fit. We try not to be highly, highly selective, because we know everyone has their own backstories, but we are looking for folks who want to be in a communal setting. If you have a hard time being around people, the shelter is going to be really tough. It doesn't mean that we won't let you in, but you're just going to be exposed to a lot of folks fairly often. You're sharing a space, you're sharing a sleeping space, sharing meals with folks. And so it's important to be able to be a part of that community in a meaningful way. And then we ask that folks are working towards housing. We are a transitional shelter. We don't put a time limit on how long folks can stay in the shelter, because we know everyone is on a different trajectory with that. But we want everyone to be working actively towards housing. And our staff make sure that that happens in terms of equipping people with resources, helping folks navigate benefits, social services, housing applications, job applications, all that sort of stuff. So if that initial conversation with Mary Ann goes well, we run a background check. We're not looking, to really sort of pick your background apart by any means. We're just looking for things like, sex offenses, things like crimes against women and children, because we do allow women and children in the shelter, so we need to keep it a safe space. But otherwise, small little charges here and there, we're not going to judge you for that. We're not going to judge you anyway, but that wouldn't hinder anyone from getting in. So at that point, we would welcome you into the shelter, and you'd begin working with the staff, being a part of the community, and hopefully moving towards housing.
And one of the things, Sam, that I've learned working with faith-based community is the value of transition, as you mentioned. And of course, all of the programs that the AFC offers are ultimately designed to be transitional. Tell us more about that, about the methods you're using to help people with transition, because I know there are several approaches that you're taking, and from my observation, have been remarkably successful in just the short time that you've been here.
Yeah. So again, I have to give our staff all the credit for this, because I walked into some really great structures. When every person comes in, a staff member, usually Marianne, will do a needs assessment. So we have a pretty comprehensive list of things that she'll walk through with each person, and it'll identify things like, do you need to sign up for SNAP food stamps? Do you need a cell phone? Do you need medical attention? Do you need mental health services? Because we realize that housing doesn't exist in a vacuum. Oftentimes we need these other sort of stabilizing services before we can think about the daunting process of trying to find permanent housing. So that's the initial one. We then also ask folks to work on a weekly goal. We are not asking them to have, unattainable goals, but we say, number one, what's your long-term housing goal? What do you feel like is your path to housing? And so that's always at the top of a worksheet that our folks have. And then each week we ask them to identify one goal to move towards that. It doesn't have to be directly housing related. It can be anything that is bettering their situation. So for some folks, it might be, I'm going to go to therapy this week, and I'm going to work on my mental health, because my mental health has been a barrier to my well-being, to my housing, to a lot of things. And so we just ask folks to move in that direction through those goals. And then everyone is paired with a goal partner, a staff member who checks in weekly and says, how'd it go? We're not here to judge, did you get it perfectly right? Some of our folks set really high goals, so they don't always hit them, but we want to make sure they're always thinking about it, always trying to build that forward momentum. Oftentimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but that's how it is with anyone in life. So we're there to support them along the way. And then we try to connect folks also to relevant housing based on their situation. So folks who may qualify for particular housing vouchers, we'll help them apply for that. If it's job searching so that they can get steady income and then try to find a room to rent, we'll help with that. Everyone's path looks a little bit different, but it takes a lot to be able to navigate those systems. Yeah. So our staff do an excellent job of helping folks kind of work their way through the maze of social services and housing in Santa Cruz County.
And I know one of the things that you and Marianne have done, which really is, I think, kind of a new aspect to the program, is to help the community with socialization. So oftentimes unhoused folks, pardon me, just don't socialize very much. They're shunned by the community. They don't have the friends. They have that kind of aloneness feeling. And I think one of the signal features really of the shelter now is kind of the move towards socialization more and the building of community.
Yeah, that's something that's really important. Again, when we feel confident as people, when we feel secure in relationships, then we tend to make better decisions, whether you're housed or unhoused. That is just sort of the way that most human beings function. And so we try to do that internally, but we also try to do it externally as well. So we've done things like partnered with an organization called Sweaty Sheep here in Santa Cruz, and they took our folks.
Wonderful guy. Shout out to him.
Exactly. Yeah. So he took us and some folks from the Homeless Garden Project, city council members, some other folks out on a sailing trip one Saturday, which was great. It's something that, you don't think about as maybe being helpful towards finding housing, but it gives a sense of normalcy of saying, you know what, I'm really enjoying myself. Maybe I'm not thinking about all of the pressing issues that are in my life right now. You get to relax and take a breath. We partnered with our folks over at Cultivated in Creativity, which is at Trinity Presbyterian Church, and they hosted an art workshop. for our folks as well. We've got some folks who are going to plan a hike for our shelter members. So it's really about connecting with one another, connecting with the community around them, and getting in a place where people feel holistically more stable, and then can make better decisions, move towards housing, really kind of better themselves in general.
Yeah. So you were saying that it seems like the transition rate has ticked up a little, somewhat, with the ability to kind of be more in touch with. I believe this program is really a hands-on program to be as successful as possible. And one of the signal features, again, that I say of kind of your tenure just starting out is that you're a very hands-on person.
Yeah, I definitely try to be. Part of that is because I think to manage or lead any program, you need to know the people that are a part of it. There has to be trust built, and so it's important to know the folks who are in the program. And so whether that's the actual program participants, the staff across the board, trying to really kind of see where they're at, because to help folks move towards more sustainable ways of living, it's all sort of contextual to their lives. And so if we don't know anything about their lives, then we may not be as much help to them as we would want to be. And so I try to be pretty hands-on. I try to be in the shelter several times a week, checking in with folks. Our staff is there. Again, the staff is really the presence that is there consistently and very hands-on as well. So it's an all hands, to pardon the pun, it's an all hands on deck effort.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know that connecting the shelter, the community members with resources is absolutely essential. How much do you and Marianne reach out to the resources that are available, kind of familiarize yourself with them so that you can in turn, connect the community members with those resources should they choose to avail themselves of them?
Yeah, we are constantly trying to connect with those resources. Marianne has done a fantastic job. She has an entire resource binder for a while, an entire table full of resources for folks. So, we can't meet every single need, but hopefully if there is a need or something going on, we can point someone in the right direction. There are a lot of people and a lot of organizations that I'm sure you've spotlighted here doing amazing work in Santa Cruz around housing and just around general well-being. And the interagency work together is what makes it really effective for the folks who are being served by it, who are a part of it. So we know we're just a small piece of the puzzle, and we want to make sure that we are connecting folks to job services, places like Downtown Streets Team and Homeless Garden Project, right, to day centers, places like MHCAN, that can sort of be a place of rest in well-being. To mental health services, to housing services. There are all sorts of great things going on. So we're always looking for partnerships, looking for resources and ways to connect with other organizations.
And of course, this work is impossible to do in a financial vacuum. And so we always mention, I think, on these programs that there's an opportunity through the afcsantacruz.org website to contribute. The AFC and the Faith Community Shelter are funded by either grants and or contributions. And so in order to keep these programs going and keep them vital, people, if they choose to donate a couple of their dollars, it would be appreciated.
Very much appreciated. And at this point, as of when we're recording today, which is October or September, I suppose, of 2021, we actually are not grant funded at this point. So we're relying completely on the donations of faith communities, of individuals who are coming in. And I will say, if you're watching this pretty quickly after it's recorded, we actually have a very generous donor who is doubling any gifts between now and the end of November 2021. So if you donate $1, it becomes $3 through this generous donor. So definitely a good time to give to the AFC.
Yeah. And what's your kind of your vision for the future? Do you see once we move past the pandemic, perhaps, and back into rotation, do you think the shelter numbers will expand from a relatively modest mid-teens to maybe a little more?
I certainly hope so. Yeah. So historically, the shelter has topped out at about 20 or so folks. For a while, we actually had two rotating shelters going, so we were serving about 40 individuals.
Wow.
During COVID, because of social distancing, we've had to tamper that down to about 15 folks. But we always want to serve as many people as possible while providing a stable environment. So we certainly want to get back up to that 20 threshold. We're just doing one rotating shelter to start with. I would love to see us jump back into a second one if we can, and build on that. But it all depends on COVID and the trajectory of that. So I'm hoping that we are turning a corner and we can begin to take in a few more folks.
Yeah. And of course, you're just beginning your tenure, but the folks, many of the folks who've been in the shelter have been in through the duration of the pandemic. Tell us a little bit about their observation of protocols, because it's just been fantastic. It's really notable that in this shelter, we've had a little to no transmission of the virus during this whole pandemic period. And that's really a testament to not only yourself, the coordinators, but also the community members themselves.
Yeah, so we've had 0 positive cases, which is amazing, and we're very fortunate. And a lot of credit to Debbie Bates, my predecessor, the staff, and like you said, the shelter members. So we do require masks inside at all times, social distancing at night. We sanitize regularly, and we actually have 100% of our shelter members vaccinated, which is really amazing. Folks really jumped on that quickly. They value their own safety, and there's a real sense of accountability towards one another. And so, other than the normal, like anywhere else in society, the occasional, hey, can you pull your mask up? Folks are fantastic about caring for one another. They really connect the COVID protocol adherence to a sense of belonging to one another and an obligation to one another. So we'll keep that up, and continue to maintain high standards for that, because we want to keep our folks safe.
And of course, apart from the community members themselves, there's the supervisory structure. Tell us a little bit about how you relate and work with Marianne and the coordinators to kind of, create this environment of not only transition, but an atmosphere of community.
Yeah. So we I manage the program. I'm the program manager. Marianne is the assistant manager, and she does very similar work to me, hands-on sort of stuff. And then we have a team of coordinators who are actually on site most of the time with our folks. They are there when we're open 24/7. They're there 12 hours a day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And so they're the real sort of physical, consistent presence
There's
with
boots
folks.
on the ground there.
Yes, they are indeed. And I cannot praise them enough. During the pandemic, especially, our coordinators have really, they always did an amazing job from what I hear, but have really stepped up their game and said, we have a lot of time with these folks. How can we maximize it? What can we do? And they begin to get incredibly intentional about helping people identify resources, move towards housing, and also just to get to know our shelter members better. And so there is a real sense of camaraderie between the staff and the shelter members, partly because of how much time we get to spend together, but also because of a genuine sense of care and a desire to have a feeling of belonging. We stress over and over again that it's about community. And so I think most of the folks who are there, whether they're there as employees or they're as shelter members, have a pretty high belief in that and are really invested in that. And so we also, I should mention, our night monitor. So when our coordinators leave, we have a night monitor, Al, who does an amazing job. He has been in the program.
Al Anthony, absolutely.
Yep, Al Anthony has been a long time night monitor and knows the program like the back of his hand. So he's the one who keeps the ship running when we are out, and at night when things can potentially get a little wonky. He keeps things in line, does an excellent job.
And I know ideally you like to kind of strike that delicate balance between socialization and transition. And in my observation, not only do the coordinators do it, but that comes as reflected from the top. And I think your leadership really has instilled in people, how to create that balance, how to really socialize and get to know people, but also try to help them down the road into something a little different, depending on their own, beliefs.
Yeah, we want to have a sense of warmth and belonging, but we don't want it to feel like, oh, I should spend 20 years here, because we're a shelter. We're not designed for that. We're not. It's not a comfortable enough space, quite honestly. So that's usually not a big issue. A lot of our folks are really, really motivated. COVID was tough because it just didn't feel safe out there. So I think everyone is sort of getting back into this sort of mindset of, all right, let's start getting things moving as life gets quasi back to normal. We're really starting to see folks kind of pick up their momentum.
Well, Sam, we've got a couple of minutes left. If you'd like to share your vision briefly for the future of the Faith Community Shelter, we'd be happy to hear it.
Yeah, well, one of the biggest things I'm excited for is getting back in the actual faith communities. So building on those relationships and bridging those social divides, I think, is going to be a really big piece and really helpful. Beyond that, we would love to see the numbers grow. We'd love to see more faith communities involved. We're an interfaith group. If there are faith communities or even non-faith communities who want to be involved, feel free to reach out to me. We have opportunities to cook. We have opportunities to host, for opportunities to mentor, all sorts of good stuff. So we'd love to see that sort of net widen and expand to welcome more folks and connect more folks across lines.
And I would urge people to take advantage of those volunteer opportunities, also to donate $1 or $2 if you can, to help this great program move on into the future and remain robust, as it certainly is. Sam Altis, Program Director and Program Manager for the Faith Community Shelter program of the Association of Faith Communities, have done wonderful work across many areas of the city and county. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your great work. You are certainly welcomed to this community by everyone, and we look forward to seeing you, more of you down the road. So
Absolutely.
Thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I really appreciate it.
You're certainly welcome. And I've been Steve Plates. This has been another edition of Nonprofit Spotlight. Join us next time when we will highlight another wonderful nonprofit in Santa Cruz County, and we will see you then. Take care.